Falklands veteran Will Kevans has carved out an interesting career for himself since leaving the Welsh Guards. Successful cartoonist, animator and musician. He'd planned to fly in from France for our Forces of Change event, but due to landing a new job as a game developer, we're doing this virtually. Who can blame him for not leaving his beautiful farmhouse? Will, I'm so jealous of that backdrop.
Oh, thank you. Well, what can I do? But in my defence, it's been like 38, 40 degrees, so it's oppressively hot.
You've been working hard renovating that, haven't you? It's beautiful.
I have, yeah. I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of stonework here now. I taught myself stonemasonry, so I've done a lot of the stonework. But it's been really hard work, actually, to be honest. But I've started a new job as a games designer, so I think I'm going to delegate that responsibility to somebody else because my back can't take it anymore.
No,
Getting a bit old.
The whole point of the Forces of Change event is to celebrate those that are served and find out what happens next. Clearly a lot in your case, Will. So basically, what's it like for you now working as, in sort of game development, away from what you were doing previously?
I don't know, really. I think a skill set that I learned in the army in terms of the discipline that I learned was very much on book with what I do with games, to be honest, because you have to learn new technology. It's just like learning how to use a new rifle, learning to use a new piece of kit, or what of the enemy is using. You've got to learn what they're using. So really, I kind of took that, I guess, to my job. It's a creative job, but obviously there's an element of creativity involved in it, which doesn't really come from the army at all. But I think you do have to be quite creative as a soldier sometimes when you're, sort of planning some kind of tactics and stuff like that. But really, I think it's just that kind of mental process. And I've just moved on with that, really.
You are the class of 82, a particularly poignant time for you this time of year and for the group that fought in the Falklands 40 years ago.
Yes, it's a time when we all think about the guys that didn't come home. There's a kind of primal feeling of dread I feel about this time, because I think you never forget that experience when you've been in a war like that, and the fear that you experienced as a teenager, because we were, a lot of us, teenagers when we fought that war. So I don't think you ever lose that kind of dread, that fear, that kind of expectation of something awful. And I guess there's a certain element of guilt about it as well, because you feel that obviously these young lads aren't around anymore and they never got to live the life that we've lived. We're almost like living a legacy for them, because we've continued to live our life, through them to a certain extent, because obviously remember them every year or every anniversary. And I guess you get quite introspective as you become older. Obviously, you have your own children, and then you realise what that would be like to lose your own child, and it kind of becomes more profound in terms of what it means to people, I think, in that respect. So there's an element of sadness in there, but also, I guess, you kind of remember what you went through, and it's that fear that you went through, and I suppose you're happy to have survived it and got through it as well.
You've been back to the Falklands, haven't you? What was that like for you?
That was incredible, absolutely incredible. I mean, when we went there, it was to fight. We didn't know what to expect, and then when we did arrive, then obviously there were guns, there were bombs, there was a lot going on, and we were marching towards certain death, and the fear of that. And going back there to see this sunny, pleasant island that looked something a little bit like the Brecon Beacons or Scotland on a very sunny day, weather changeable, quite changeable, but people just welcomed us with open arms, and the actual hospitality of the people is incredible. And we felt that it was incredible. It was almost like when the Berlin Wall came down and you stepped into East Berlin, and it was like stepping into a black and white TV screen. And then when you step back into to West Germany, it was like stepping back into a colour TV screen. Very much like that, very different from what I expected. and people were so welcoming and so grateful. It was a very humbling experience. It was a very emotional experience. I was kind of quite should I say, drawn to tears a few times, especially when I went to the museum. I went to the museum and there was a tribute that the Falklands children, had put together for thanking the British forces for what they'd achieved when we arrived, and it was so amazing. It was incredible. But it's like a slice of England, but a slice of England and Britain from the 1950s. It's a very strange place. It's almost like stepping back in time. So there's something of a darling bud to May about it, to be honest. If I'm honest, it's like a characterization of what Britain should be or could be or was. You know, it's like a heyday, like a golden age, I would say.
As you're marking Falklands 40, you're planning a big climb up Mont Blanc with C2R. Now, they're Climb to Recovery, a special forces charity group who use climbing and expeditions to help veterans who've experienced trauma rehabilitate. Once you jump off this call, you're dialing Argentina, as a contingent will be joining you. So tell us about that involvement, that relationship. You've grown real firm friendships.
Well, it was strange. Initially, I'd been contacted by a guy who wanted to find more about my experiences on Sapper Hill at the end of the conflict and what it was like to fight against the Argentinian Marines. And in my memory, it was a relatively short period of terror where we screamed in helicopters on the 14th of June, landed in some minefields, and then pretty soon after, there was a Marine who'd got shot by a sniper on the road, and we jumped into a minefield. And pretty much by the time we got back on the road, the Argentinians had surrendered. So it was quite a surreal experience of extreme terror, thinking you were going to get absolutely, completely annihilated, to one of, oh, well, sorry, lads, that's off now. It's the Argentinians have surrendered. So it was a bit... we didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and some people just really didn't know what to do at all. It was a strange mix of emotions. And obviously, we were glad it was all over. But I was speaking to this guy about it in some detail, and I'd been planning this trip up Mont Blanc with just me and a mate, and I hadn't really thought about a charity aspect to it at all. So it really just came out of that, and I just started thinking, well, what if I turned it into a reunion between the Argentinians and British veterans, and if I could get some more British veterans on board. We've got some Welsh Guards veterans from the Falklands. I've got some 3 para veterans who are on it. So we've just really built it from there, and I was very keen to talk to the Argentinians about it. I've spoken to the military attaché. I've spoken to some friends who I spoke to when I researched my book, who are from the Argentinian side. They had a lot of contacts with some Argentinian veterans groups. A guy called Julio Arro, who has a charity group called No Me Olvides, which basically means "Don't ever forget about me." Him and Jeffrey Cardoso, who won a Nobel Peace Prize for their work with exhuming the corpses of the Argentinian soldiers who were unidentified at the end of the conflict. So basically, we've got him climbing on the trip, and obviously he's been in contact with various other Argentinian soldiers to see if they were physically able to do the climb with us. It's a bit scary, really.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I was going to lead into, because we are watching the clock ticking. So you're working on a TV drama series based on your experiences as a young man on the Falklands, and there are a lot of Welsh connections.
Yes, it's a surprising thing that when we were on the St Edmunds, going back to Puerto Madryn, which has very close relations to Wales, because it's where the first settlers from Wales arrived back in the 1800s. And it was quite interesting that some of the prisoners that we had on board spoke Welsh to some of the guys. And it was quite fascinating that there was that connection, and that connectivity to me is something that's worth exploring. So I'm hoping to connect with some of these guys if possible on this climb.
You particularly want to rebuild a story that was on board deck. It involved a lot of singing. If you're Welsh, you've got to have a voice.
Well, there's a very good friend of mine called Mike Forty Williams, and he was guarding the prisoners. And obviously, you can imagine he wanted to strike up a conversation with these guys. And they somehow found themselves having a mutual like of rock music. So him and this guy started singing Queen numbers. And suddenly you got the entire car deck singing "We Will Rock You," which is an incredible thing. I mean, it's a universal language of music. And obviously, we're all teenagers as well. So we'd come from a background where we were listening to music as teenagers. And, this is what we had in common, music, British pop music. So the whole car deck erupted in "We Will Rock You." And I think the senior NCOs amongst them were sort of trying to say, calm down, lads. This is, we're at war here. But it just kind of let rip, and they just had to let him get on with it. But it's a fantastic story, a really fantastic story. And I guess it's this idea that this kind of universal connection that you have with people around the world, despite your political and economic differences, there's still that connection. I thought it was quite amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us, Will. We're going to toast you. I hope you've got a nice glass of red there.
I've actually got a nice glass of tap water here, but it's French tap water.
Disappointing.
Disappointed.
Thank you once again for joining us. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Nostar.